Hey, hey, everybody. Another wonderful entrepreneur, perfect person to have this great conversation with because I want to tell you one of the things that she mentioned to me is this being really on purpose with your business. And at times that really changes from person to person. Our guest is a compassionate community member, a community curator that has members, female entrepreneurs, grow profitable businesses without crazy hours and being exhausted. Quinn Tempest is a desert dwelling, color loving business and marketing strategist. So let's talk a little bit more with the founder of Create Your Purpose. Welcome, Quinn.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I've been really looking forward to this conversation because I think that for so many of us, right, we measure our progress. We measure our success not by our own measures, but we do
Mhm.
it based on what we see out there, right? The internet, the world, everybody's got their own definitions, and then we're trying to keep up with those definitions. How did you get started in this realm? Because I know that you weren't always doing what you're doing now. How did you get here?
Well, you bring up a good point about seeing what everyone else is doing and then sometimes reacting to that and doing something you think you should be achieving.
Mhm.
Or in my case, not thinking about that at all. and
Yeah.
and just kind of floating and at least going through life, especially in my early years right out of college, although that was
Mm.
ages ago. I initially went to school to be an actress. I
Mhm.
wanted to be on stage, I wanted to act, and pretty soon after school, I realized, I love acting, but I don't have any professional aspirations, nor do I aspire to the lifestyle of a working actor,
Mm.
of,
Yeah.
waitressing and auditioning and all of that. And
Mhm.
so I kind of just took the first thing that came my way just to pay my bills. And I think that started a trend for me of just kind of going at life and work haphazardly because
Mhm.
what I had thought was going to be my career was no longer my career. And I didn't have the skill set or take the time to really ask myself big questions that I think would have set me up for more success and more health, that's for sure. And so, really, my first kind of few years out of college was just aimless, like a,
Mm.
a floating balloon in
Yeah.
the wind.
Oh, that's a good
And
analogy. I love that.
yeah. And so I think that experience led me to some really hard moments. I ended up in the hospital because I was
Mm.
very sick and so burnt out. I ended up having to leave my job and my life in LA and start over in my hometown and move in with my parents. And
Mhm.
it was just this whole period of my life where I didn't feel purposeful. I
Mhm.
didn't feel intentional. I didn't even know those words weren't even in my vocabulary. And
Yeah.
so I feel like a lot of where I am now, and I've been out of
Mhm.
college for, I can't even remember. It's been that long. But I think where I've gone in my own entrepreneurial journey is to help other people, especially women, ask
Mhm.
these big questions of themselves, ask these big questions about their business and recenter their own desires, their own aspirations, their own intention back into their business
Mhm.
outside of the whims of what society tells them that they should be achieving, or even if they've just never even thought about
Yeah.
these questions before. So,
Mhm.
really, what I do now is rooted in my experience of not doing that, not being purposeful for so, so long.
Yeah. I think that purpose, it's something that it's so difficult to bottle. It's so difficult to nail down. And people, again, I did a summit. I hosted a summit on purpose. It was the Purposeful You Summit, and all of the different people that attended had a different definition of that of what purpose
Yes.
was.
Hmm.
And I really think that when we start to dissect that and really say, it's okay if my definition is very different from somebody else's,
Hmm.
we can then start to focus on what our gifts are and we can focus on doing the work that we do independently and really in a way that is serving us and intentional because I think that that's what gets us into the hamster wheel.
I agree. And I love what you said about the different definition because
Mhm,
I have my own community. It's called the Create Your Purpose Collective. And it's filled with women entrepreneurs. And part of the biggest piece of the beginning few months of their
mhm,
membership is really rooting themselves in what their purpose is. And it's interesting because so many of them come in with a preconception about purpose, right? And we
mhm.
all do.
Yeah.
I think it's such this loaded term that is kind of very vague. Oftentimes
Mhm.
we think it just hits us on our head, it bonks us on our head in the middle of a quiet moment of meditation, or it's a sudden
Yeah.
realization. And in my experience, that couldn't be further from the truth. It's really interesting though, because a lot of the women will come in and they equate their purpose with what they do in their business. And that
Hmm.
is the first myth that I typically
Yeah.
like to bust through is that
Mhm,
purpose is not what you do. It
mm,
is the why that drives what you do. And that why, that emotional drive can come to life in
mhm,
numerous ways. It can come to life in your business. It can come to life in volunteering. It can come
mhm.
to life in your work or whatever. It doesn't have to be constrained to just one format. But this
Yeah.
seems to be a common preconception of purpose is that
Mhm,
it is basically collapsed
mhm.
into what you do, which,
Right.
I get because a lot of, I'm sure you too have a reason that you started your business. You
Sure.
have a motivation. And oftentimes I think that emotional drive can start to just get collapsed into what you do versus clarifying that drive behind it.
Yeah. I think that you really are hitting the nail on the head with this because you mentioned volunteering. I know that there's times in which I will show up in the different organizations and I'm doing the volunteer work and I think, "Oh, this is really my sweet spot. I'm really doing something that I love, that I'm passionate, that I'm good at." And it's totally independent of my business, right? It's nothing to do with business. For many of us who are entrepreneurs, though, we're also perfectionists. Do you find that in your journey, you've been a perfectionist as well? And how did you overcome that or continue to work on that?
I like to joke that I'm a recovering perfectionist. Like
Yes,
I'm
I
in
get it.
recovery, I've got to I sometimes I slide back and sometimes I have to relearn lessons I've learned 10 times before. So yeah, I think perfectionism is such a challenge for both me and for many of
Mhm,
the women that I coach and are members of my collective. And it's funny because it's like the thing that is almost the least helpful in entrepreneurship
mm,
because to me, entrepreneurship is about experimentation. It's
yeah.
about intentionally throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. Not just throwing it haphazardly, but being like, maybe I'll throw it here and see if that's the place for it to go. And I think perfectionism holds you back from experimentation because you're just trying to aim to get it right.
Yeah.
You're thinking as if you were a student trying to get a B or an A on a paper and
Mhm,
that you're going to get graded. Well, there's no grades in business, there's no gold stars,
mhm,
there's just you. And it's really hard to kind of slough off that feeling of driving towards a specific goal when
mhm.
really your goal should be to iterate, to try things, to experiment,
Yeah.
and then to get that data, get that insights, and start to make decisions based on those insights. So, yeah, I mean, I definitely struggle with it, but I've
Mhm.
also had enough experience now in over a decade running my own business that I know it's not beneficial to me. And I find different ways to kind of counteract that tendency in both myself and in the women I work with.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that, the experimenting with different things. There is a place though, and I'd love to get your opinion on this. I just had this conversation with the women in my mastermind as well. And at times as entrepreneurs, it's important to really be able to trial and test things. But when do you draw the line and really stick your course as opposed to going after the oh shiny like many entrepreneurs do?
It's a great question. And I think the answer is it depends on the stage of business you're in.
Mm.
So that's really a business stage question. And I
Mhm.
see the experimentation to be very vital in the early stages of business.
Mhm.
It's also vital in
Yeah.
other ways in later stages, but in a
Yeah.
different way. But in the early stage, you're trying to figure out your audience, your message, what lands, what doesn't land, the right marketing strategies, the right systems. All of that is a big experiment.
Mhm.
And it is important to test things out, to try things out, especially if you're purpose driven,
Yeah.
because you're trying to kind of like find that notch within you that feels good and settled and grounded and lit up.
Mhm.
Where it starts to become, I think, a crutch is when you really lean on that and never, like you say, go all in
Mm.
on what's working. And I do find that tends to happen,
Yeah.
especially with entrepreneurs who are a few years in, although the timing doesn't matter as much. But typically they've seen success, they've
Mhm.
got some revenue coming in. Maybe they have a few different revenue streams, a few different offers. But what starts to happen is if they keep going down that path, then they're going to be weighed down by all that they're doing.
Yeah.
They're going to start to get burnt out. They're going to start to get pulled in lots of different directions.
Yeah.
And I also find that they become resentful of their
Mm.
business. And
Yes.
that's hard, right? Because you get
Mhm.
disconnected from why you did it in the first place. You get disconnected from your purpose. And
Mhm.
so really at that stage, and that's a stage I work with a lot of entrepreneurs because it's the chance for them to really root themselves in that why, to look
Yeah.
at what's really working and what's not, and to kind of find that nexus of purpose and profit. Like if you think of
Mhm.
a Venn diagram, like purpose is a big
Yeah.
circle, profit is, and then in the middle is that sweet spot.
That sweet spot. Yeah.
And I think it's at that stage of business when you can really lean into that, you can move into a new stage, which
Mhm.
is about deepening the foundations that you built. And
Yeah.
then, of course, there's going to be experiments as you go further, but it's going to be smaller things like, should I try this experiment in my launch strategy or should I change this messaging? You're
Mhm.
not like trying all these new different things because you know what your thing is.
Yeah.
So it's really depending on what business stage they're in and when it's an asset and when it's a crutch.
Yeah, I think that, I love that you talk about the stages. For
Yeah.
me, I wish someone and by the way, this happens a lot, right? We come into entrepreneurship with our past experience. Successful business experience. I grew our business line to multi-million dollars, expanded the company. And yet when I started my own business, I wanted to do it all. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. But I never really understood the different stages and how they
Yeah.
really can affect and drive what you should be working on because the person that is just starting out and doesn't know what they want to do and who they're going to serve should not be focusing on the same things as someone who's been in business for a long time and is ready to scale to go
Mhm.
into a new frontier in essence, right? And then of course there are the people in the middle. What is the first thing that entrepreneurs should focus on as they're beginning their journey? And maybe they've been established, they have their, clarity on who they serve, what they offer. But what is the next thing that you would say someone needs to really concentrate on?
Yeah, well, I think just to your point on stages, they're crucial. In fact, I developed them for my members of my collective because I saw so many of them kind of getting down on themselves for things that they shouldn't even be getting down on themselves because it's not something they need to focus on. So the whole goal of stages is to normalize challenges that all
Mhm.
entrepreneurs go through and to give them permission to be where they are with actionable steps forward.
Yeah.
So, when you ask kind of what needs to happen, tell me a little bit more about where you think that person is. You said they have revenue coming in, they have
Sure, but
clarity,
not
like how are
consistent, not
but not
consistent income.
consistent.
Yeah. They, and I see this a lot, right? There'll be people who started a business, were very passionate, and then someone hired them and they got some money in, but they're not really clear what their offers are. Or that person worked with them one, but then they never came back, and then they want to get other clients and really struggle. They
Mhm.
get income in, but it's what I call the you have a hobby, not a business kind of income.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that makes more sense. So kind of that feast or famine cycle where maybe they get a couple clients here, a couple
Mhm.
sales there, but
Yep.
it's not consistent. Yeah. I think the biggest thing with that is having a way to build their pipeline, so to speak. And that's
Yeah.
going to look different for different businesses, but my background is in corporate marketing and that
Mhm.
was the biggest focus was lead generation.
Yeah.
So basically if we strip it down that means how are you getting in front of the people who
Mhm.
might hire you, pay you, buy from you, donate to you
Mhm.
in the future. And I think that visibility piece is actually really hard because it's marketing and marketing is so much more than just posting on social media. It actually
Yes.
tends to bring up a lot of
Oh,
emotional
we could talk
things.
about this forever because,
We
by the
could.
way, when it comes to marketing and branding, people think that it's just having a logo, and that drives me crazy. And mostly because that's how I started. I was so intent. I need a logo. Build me a logo, husband.
Yeah.
It needs to be pretty, but it needs to be also strong. And then I lost my way because who was I putting myself in front of, like you're talking about, right? That
Yeah.
visibility, which is key. Yeah, so
Yeah, so I
talk a
think
little bit
it's
more about that.
really yeah, I think it comes down to looking at what has worked and what has not worked in reality to bring in
Mhm.
business.
Yeah.
So I think at that stage it's really about asking those questions is where have I gotten my clients? Usually most
Mhm.
people will answer from referrals. So
Mhm.
I say, okay, well, who was referring you? And there often tends to be like one or two super
Mhm.
referrers who send
Yep.
you lots of work. And so it's cultivating that relationship. It's about making sure that your marketing attracts the right
Mhm.
type of people. So if you want, say, a creative woman entrepreneur to be your client, you need to make sure you speak to that in how you present your brand, how it looks, and all of that. But also setting up some kind of filters to also repel the wrong clients. Because I think at that stage,
Yeah.
one of the other things I tend to see is the burnout gets amplified because they're just taking whatever they
Mhm.
can get.
Yes.
And they often work with non ideal clients. And granted, I
Mm.
think there's a time for that because sometimes you just got to pay the bills, you know?
Yeah, of course.
But I think it's doing it with intention and setting boundaries around like who gets it through your door. And then if they're overstepping your boundaries, how you kind of bring them back. So,
Mm.
really looking at what has worked in the past. And then also you can look at if you have tapped into marketing channels, what is working? And also how can you simplify? Because I think another tendency of that stage is to be everywhere all at once. I'm going
Mhm.
to be on Instagram. I'm going to be on LinkedIn. I'm going to try TikTok. And I bet
Not
you
sustainable.
no, no, it's not, especially if you're a small business owner.
Mhm.
So I think at that point, you have to really look at the hard numbers.
Mm.
What platform is converting people into your email list and then converting them into your leads? Because if you start spreading out your efforts too much, you're actually spreading out the ROI of those
Mhm.
efforts to not get you anywhere. So, one of the reasons I've never joined TikTok, I don't worry about LinkedIn too much,
Mhm.
is because Instagram has been for
Yeah.
7 years a high performing marketing channel for
Mm.
me. And I can point to specific numbers from that.
Yeah.
And so I go all in on that, and that's enough. So
Mhm.
I think to kind of sum it up is what is working, what is not working, go all in on the stuff that is and forget the rest.
Yeah, I love that you talked about really investing in that one platform. When I started my business, of course, as someone in the corporate world, I had a very good presence on LinkedIn. If you go to my LinkedIn, sure, I mean, it's updated, but I don't necessarily double down on LinkedIn
Mhm.
because I wanted to learn Instagram. I wanted to be able to understand it. And really, that's where my focus is the most. But I think, we really think that we need to learn it all, do it all. And we're lacking if we don't do that. And
Yeah.
again, I love that you back your reasoning for being on Instagram with numbers.
Mhm.
Entrepreneurs are not checking their numbers. Tell me how do numbers drive your business, especially with marketing? And we're going to unpack more on that. What is your
Yeah.
lead generation machine?
Yeah, I'm pretty obsessed with it. I have a whole business dashboard in Google Sheets where I
Mhm.
update it every month with different numbers, launch stats, revenue, things like that, so I can
Yeah.
really know. And I think that is something that even in the early stages, you
Mhm.
should start getting comfortable with them
Yeah.
because it will serve you later on. But
Mhm.
yeah, so I track quite a few key results and metrics in my business. I think the first one is just that top of the funnel lead generation.
Mhm.
So I have a quiz that I run ads to that I basically pay around $1 per lead for it,
Mhm.
and it fuels my email list while I sleep, which is
Yeah.
nice. So I track that to kind of see how that's working, and I can also now track that pretty well, although it takes a little manual work to how that converts into real revenue for me.
Nice.
Although it can take time for that
Right.
sales cycle to happen. But other numbers would just be revenue, also revenue streams.
Mhm.
So this is something that has been really interesting. I just recently did this where I looked from 2017 to now and how my revenue has shifted,
Mhm.
not just like pure like how much I made, but how much I made in different parts of my business because prior to 2017, I was 100% service based.
Mhm.
So one on one client work, design, branding, strategy. In 2017, it was a pivot point for me because I decided, well, I was looking forward to starting a family one day and
Mhm.
realizing that, how my business was set up wasn't really baby friendly. So
Mm.
I started to diversify my revenue.
Right.
And so I created basically a heat map to show myself how that transition happened. And I think
Mm.
this is one of these like misleading things and messages that is kind of out there right now is that you can find success and especially in an online business basically overnight
Oh, thank you for
with
saying
little
that because that
effort.
does not happen.
It really
No.
doesn't. And you know
People
that.
people think, when I started my business, people are like, "Oh, you're doing so great." I'm like, "No, I'm not." I mean, you see me out there, that's great, but and that's really what people think, happens, that you put your shingle up and then you're all of a sudden you're a seven-figure earner, and
Yeah.
I really have a hard time with the coaches that are, throwing and by the way, we can unpack this too, right? Yeah, they may be bringing in seven figures, but what does it cost them?
Yeah, exactly.
And, what is their bottom line? So, yeah, so I love that.
Yeah, so I think that that's the thing is to look back at my heat map and look just how long it took. It took
Mhm.
3 years to even see meaningful results from my new revenue
Yeah.
streams. And then it took a couple more years to kind of settle that in. And
Mhm.
then, if I add one in, that's going to take me a couple years too, and that's
Yeah.
okay. And so I think kind of going back to the messaging that there's lots of messages out there, and they've always been there going back to,
Mhm.
what snake oil salesmen in the
Yeah.
in the West, but I think they're just so much more visible now because
Mhm.
they're literally in our face every single
Right.
day,
Right.
targeting us specifically. And I have seen on the ground level with my clients, my collective members, that
Mhm.
it affects them. It affects their expectations for their business, like how much money they think they can make and how long of a time period. It expects their aspirations for the vision they have for their business. And really, what my work is all about is rooting themselves in them. And
Mhm.
well, what's your definition of enough?
Yeah.
How do you want to feel successful? And what does that literally look like in your
Mhm.
numbers, in your business strategy, in your marketing, in your systems, in
Mhm.
your relationships? And really root yourself in that because it's so easy to compare other people's outsides to our insides, but we're
Mm.
just looking from the outside in.
Absolutely.
And when
Absolutely.
you can really root yourself in you, you can start to build from the inside out, which frankly feels so
Mhm.
much better.
Yeah, I totally agree. One of the first, metrics for me and by the way, I love metrics, I love systems. It's definitely something that, a lot of my clients learn when they start working with me, right? That we are gonna look at numbers. A track
Yeah.
number grows, but my first my first metric was being able to have the flexibility to be with my niece,
Mhm.
and travel to spend time with her. And that's still, if I know that that is a danger zone when my schedule is not giving me that intentional margin to do the things that I enjoy, spend time with friends, travel. be there with family, my husband, and ultimately that's how I measure my success is by being able to have that blend that serves me and it really allows me to live the type of life that I desire, not by somebody else's design.
Exactly. And I think that what you did and what you just said is what we all need to do and be really clear and specific about what
Mm,
we want.
yeah.
Because the way that we profit in our businesses isn't just about money.
Hmm.
Although I think that's important and we need to track
Sure.
that and know our numbers, how I define profit is anything you get back from
Hmm.
your business. And
Yeah.
that could be time with your niece, like you just said. For
Hmm.
me, it's flexibility to be with my daughter at least for half the day on Fridays, and then she
Yeah.
gets grandma time. So I
Mm,
could do household management stuff. And it's like that's going to be different for everyone. And
mhm,
also, it's going to change depending on the season of life and business you're in, too. Because there were definitely other seasons when I was just focused on getting lots of revenue to
mhm.
fund this new revenue stream I was
Right.
building, which ended up becoming my collective. And I'm super happy
Mhm.
with that. But I think it's going to change throughout your
Yeah.
entrepreneurial journey. And what's more important than the answer is that you ask the question consistently.
Mhm. Um, what type of CEO time do you have for yourself? And I know you talked about metrics and, most likely there's systems behind the house. Um, what do you do? What are some of the things that serve you the most that you would encourage individuals to work on having? What kind of systems? How much time do you set aside to really do the CEO tasks like planning and strategizing?
A lot
Yeah.
but it didn't start out that way. I'll say
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But this is actually like the core part of my collective is giving entrepreneurs a space to work on their business, not just
Mhm.
in it.
Yeah.
Because so often we are so busy in the day to day, which we need
Mhm.
to be, right? We need
Right.
to make the money, we need to deliver the services, the products, whatever.
Mhm.
But we can often get caught up in that we're not zooming out and asking,
Yeah.
well, what do I need to do in order to keep sustaining or
Mhm.
growing depending on what you want? And so for me, I remember when I was so in the weeds, this was many, many years ago, that all I could do was like 15 minutes of what you
Mhm.
say CEO time. But I made sure I did it.
Mhm.
I think it was a couple times a week and
Mhm.
I just made sure I did that before I opened up my email, before I responded to a client, for anything. And what's
Yeah.
interesting is that 15 minutes compounds over time. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
think what I got out of that was not just the time, but the confidence that I was able to move my own ideas forward,
Mhm.
the, intention that my ideas matter just as much as my clients. And
Mhm.
now I'm at a place where Mondays are no meetings at all,
Mhm.
ever,
Yeah.
non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Tuesdays and Thursdays, I do client coaching calls. I do collective
Mhm.
member calls. Typically Wednesday, I don't have too much going on. It's
Mhm.
like a work day. And then Friday, I take off to
Mm,
be with family to do household stuff.
not bad.
So I think for me, that's kind of where I've ended up,
Mhm.
where I now have lots of time and I have set boundaries in my schedule to protect that time. And it's funny because especially my collective members, they're shocked. They're like, "You don't take meetings on Mondays? How do you do that?" I was like, "I just don't take them." And I tell people they can't book with me. But, for many people, this is a big shift, especially from a traditional career path or job. Like, that's not something you necessarily have the
Yeah.
power to do, which I understand. But as an entrepreneur, you do. And
Mhm.
so you got to look at ways to protect your time and energy and that align with your bigger vision and goals.
Yeah, I love what you said. People always ask me the same question as well. I started last year not working Friday afternoons, and now to the point that most Fridays I'm not. I'm also making the space because my health is important. Being able to have the freedom and flexibility to enjoy, right? What life has. Mondays are definitely my CEO days. Those are the days that I like to kind of plan out and revisit my goals and revisit the actions that I should be taking on a daily, monthly, weekly basis because we disconnect from that. So many of us start off the year with that word of the year. We start the year with our big
Mhm.
plans or our big goals. And by this time of year, we have no idea of, what was it that I started doing and where am I? And did I even get close to even implementing some of it? And I think that that's why I highly recommend individuals to do that. And certainly, I love that you had that evolution from starting small, compounding, and then creating the habits. And that's one of the big things that I encourage individuals is with those habits. You've talked about email lists, you've talked about marketing. What is the one thing that people should do when they're struggling to build an email list and they're not yet ready to invest money into advertising?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is start before you think you're ready.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many of my one-on-one clients will come to me wanting to develop a course or sell a
Hmm.
membership or something. And I
Yeah.
ask, okay, well, how big is your audience? How big is your email
Hmm.
list? They say, oh, I don't have one. I was like,
Yes.
okay, well, then you're
Yep.
starting on the wrong step.
Yeah.
So start
Absolutely.
before you're ready. And it could
Mhm,
be as simple as taking, if you're a client facing business, simple as taking a step from your client process and
mhm,
allowing people access to that.
yeah,
So what is the pain point that you fix and you help your clients resolve, and how can you take existing assets and turn
mhm,
that into some kind of opt-in
yeah,
for your website or some kind of offer. It doesn't matter what it is, but the format is less important than answering the question is, what do I help my people solve? What is the
mhm,
problem I help them solve? And eventually you can have multiple opt-ins, but you need to start with one. I
yeah,
remember when I first launched my own website, after I left my agency role, that was the first thing I did. And I
mhm.
started with a workshop that was called like Create Your Purpose, which now is my whole business. But I started with a free workshop. It didn't do so well. So I took the worksheet that came
Mhm,
with that workshop and I flipped the messaging and started leading with that. That did better, but I knew it could do even better than that. So I turned it into a quiz. And I
nice.
turned it into a quiz. I think this was like 5 years ago at this point,
Mhm,
and it's been taken over 18,000 times now and
amazing.
generated 11,000 emails. So start before you're ready. Take an asset
Mhm,
that you have already and turn it into something that you can offer, and figure out what is that key problem you help people solve, knowing that you can change your opt-in later, but
yeah.
definitely start before you think you need to.
I love that you're talking about start before you're ready. I think that that's the one thing that I see with individuals, right? They want the perfection. I just did a video about this last week for on my stories. Stop taking the class. The class is not going to get you the clients. You having the
Mhm,
qualifications, you're going to feel like you need the class. You're going to feel like you need the certification, but you don't know how to service clients unless you're starting to put yourself out there and
mhm,
really do the work. Start before you're ready and build it before you think you can do it. Many people stay in that creation mode, stay in the sidelines, working in the business, not on it. And that's
mhm.
definitely one of the biggest detrimental things that I see a lot. Where do you see your collective, your community going? Where do you see yourself continuing to grow, and how will you measure the next big thing for you?
Yeah, well, I came off an extended maternity leave last year. So I feel like I only started getting settled back into my business like at the end of last year. And now I feel like I'm definitely back running. But it's given me a good chance to kind of do what I help other people do, which is
Hmm.
root myself back in my own purpose in my business. And so what really comes next is this summer I'm going to do another enrollment for the collective. So that means we invite new women in. They have
Hmm.
to apply to be part of our community. So I'm excited for that because it's just so cool to meet new women
Yeah.
who are doing really great things and have
Hmm.
powerful messages but just feel a little disconnected.
Yeah.
So that's
Mhm.
next, and then I'm also working on kind of changing how I approach my own one-on-one services. Because
Mhm.
for years I did branding, web design, strategy, and I kind of stopped doing that for a while, as you know, I was pregnant and building the collective, and so I'm looking to get back to that in a different way. So that's kind of what comes next to me, but for me, but I'm also about to release, depending on when this comes out, what working title I'm calling the Profit on Purpose Workbook,
Ooh,
kind of
very
touching
nice.
on, we talked about the misleading messages, the
Mhm,
seven-figure stuff, the overnight success, and how it's so important to define what is success for you
mhm.
and what is enough for you. So that's what I'm designing this workbook to help people answer. And so that should come out here in May,
Ooh,
or actually in a couple of weeks. So that will still be April. So I'm excited to
okay.
start sharing about that, talking
Yeah,
about
I'm
that, and
excited. I'm
yeah,
on
and
your
get that in
email
front of
list. I
people.
definitely will keep an eye out for that
Yeah.
and definitely
Yeah.
will put the information in the show notes. Quinn, that's exciting. That's really
Mm,
good. I think that that really, again, it's consistent and congruent with your message and everything
mhm.
that we've been talking about. Would you say you feel confident today?
Oh, definitely. But that's a big difference from where I felt even a year ago. Just coming out of motherhood and coming back into my business and being like, what am I doing? But thankfully, I had a lot of really good support that helped me through that. So yes, now, but I also know just how hard it can be when you don't feel that way, especially when you're your own boss.
Absolutely. And for the person that's not feeling confident in their business, what's your advice and how do they connect with you?
I think confidence is a paradox. You have to do the thing you're afraid of, do it brave and do it anyway. So try something. You can do it scary, do it messy, because that's the way that you're going to build that muscle of confidence over time. And yeah, you
Mm.
can connect with me. I'm on Instagram far too much. So I'm over there at quinn.tempest. Also, you can go to my website at quinntempest.com and you can take my purpose quiz if you're kind of curious about how to integrate your core values and your purpose more into your business.
Well, that is amazing. I'm so happy that you are part of the Confident You family and that you're visiting Casa de Confidence. I know that the work that you're doing is really creating a ripple effect because the women that are part of your collective and are working with you, not only are they living in their purpose, but now they're really helping the people who they're reaching. So thank you so much for the work that you do and for leading by example. Quinn Tempest com is Quinn's website. Again, we'll have all the information on the show notes. We so appreciate you being here. Don't forget, everybody, go confidently in the direction of your dreams. Thanks again, Quinn.
Thank you.